The train screeched to a halt, its iron wheels shrieking against the tracks, sending a cloud of dust swirling across the barren Montana plain. Sarah Whitfield clutched her carpetbag as she stepped down from the last car, her heart pounding in her chest. She had imagined this moment countless times on the long journey from her small hometown in Ohio, each letter from Thomas McGraw fueling her anticipation. In those letters, he had painted a life of quiet simplicity, a ranch with fields stretching endlessly under a sky so wide it made you feel small and free at once. He had described his 7 children, the way they laughed, their small hands eager for guidance, and the chores that kept life honest. He had written with warmth and tenderness, the kind that made her feel that she was stepping into a life already waiting for her, yet as she looked around the dusty train station, there was no man waiting. No tall figure in a wide-brimmed hat holding a hand out to steady her. Only the old station master, leaning on a broom, his eyes cautious behind thick spectacles, and the faint outline of a wagon hitched to 2 mules. A knot tightened in Sarah's stomach as she clutched the edge of her carpetbag and smoothed the folds of her modest gray dress. The letters had seemed so vivid, so real, but now the reality was almost unbearably silent, save for the wind sighing across the plains. "Ma'am," the station master called, his voice gentle but cautious. "You Miss Whitfield?" "Yes," she answered, her throat dry and voice barely above a whisper. He shifted uneasily, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mr. McGraw sent word a month ago." "Well, he's passed. Caught in a storm while driving cattle." His words fell slowly, deliberately, each one a hammer against her chest. "Passed?" she echoed, her voice trembling. Her mind spun, the carefully nurtured visions of her new life slipping through her fingers like sand. She had traveled hundreds of miles, leaving behind everything familiar, all for a promise written in ink and hope. And now the promise itself was gone. He nodded solemnly. "Buried him myself. He was a good man, ma'am. But those children, 7 of them. They're still up at the ranch. County's worried they'll be split up if someone don't step in." Sarah stared at the horizon, at the long line of hills bathed in the gold of the setting sun, feeling a strange stirring in her chest. The letter had mentioned children who needed care. Now, faced with 7 little lives teetering on the edge of being scattered to strangers, the thought of leaving them alone seemed impossible. Something inside her, a fierce, quiet determination she hadn't known she possessed, rose up. "Take me there," she said finally, her voice calm, almost resolute. The wagon ride to the McGraw ranch was long and silent, broken only by the creak of the wheels and the distant cry of birds. As they crested a low rise, the house appeared, a weathered structure with peeling white paint and crooked shutters, surrounded by a tangle of wild grass and leaning fences. Chickens scattered as the wagon rolled near, clucking and fluttering in disarray. On the porch, a handful of children appeared, their eyes wide and wary, peering at her with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. The oldest, a boy perhaps 14, stepped forward, arms crossed and brow furrowed. "You the lady from the letter?" he asked, his voice guarded. "Yes," Sarah said softly, lowering her carpetbag to the ground. "My name is Sarah Whitfield." The boy's jaw tightened, and he glanced at the others. "Pa's gone. You can go back." Her throat constricted, but she met his gaze steadily. "I know your father isn't here," she said. "But I think you still need someone. And maybe I do too." A smaller girl, clutching a rag doll, stepped forward slightly, her wide eyes brimming with tears. "You ain't our ma," she whispered. "No," Sarah said, her voice gentle. "Not yet. But I can be someone who cares for you. Someone who will stay, if you let me." They exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering across their faces. Behind them, the house seemed even lonelier than before, the crooked shutters and sagging porch a mirror of their own guarded hearts. A faint wind rattled the window panes, carrying the scent of dust and pine. The eldest boy turned away, muttering under his breath. "Do what you want. Ain't nobody stopping you." Inside the house, the smell of dust and neglect clung to every surface. Dishes were piled in the sink, crumbs littered the worn wooden floor, and laundry lay scattered in haphazard piles. Yet on the mantel sat a row of small treasures, a wooden horse, a carefully carved feather, a faded photograph of a man cradling a baby, Thomas McGraw, smiling with a gentle pride. Sarah's hand trembled as she touched the frame. "You did your best," she whispered, her fingers lingering on the edges of the photograph. "I'll do mine too." That evening, she set about preparing the first real meal those children had eaten in weeks. She chopped vegetables, stirred a thick pot of stew, and baked simple biscuits, all the while humming softly to herself, trying to fill the silence with something warm and alive. The children watched her from the edges of the table, silent, wary, and suspicious, unsure what to make of this stranger who had appeared unbidden into their lives. When she placed bowls of stew in front of each child, the youngest, a towhead boy no older than 4, reached up and tugged at her sleeve. "You gonna stay?" he asked, his voice small and hopeful. Sarah's lips trembled, tears threatening to spill, but she smiled. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm going to stay." As night fell, the wind whistled through the cracks in the old house, rattling the shutters and sweeping through the empty corners. Yet inside, with the children gathered around a flickering lamp and the smell of stew lingering in the air, a small warmth began to grow. Sarah Whitfield, a woman who had traveled for love only to find loss, made a quiet promise to herself and to these children. She would not leave this house. She would fill it with laughter and care, with bedtime stories and songs, with the kind of love that Thomas McGraw had promised, even if he could not keep it himself. And in the silence of that first night, as the children huddled near her, a bond began to form. The house no longer seemed quite so empty, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt that perhaps she had arrived where she was always meant to be. A home was not merely a roof or walls, it was the hearts that inhabited it, and she would nurture each one with the care and tenderness she carried within her own. The wind howled outside, carrying the scent of sage and earth, but inside, the house began to breathe again. And Sarah, though alone in ways she had never imagined, felt the first stirrings of belonging. She had come for a husband, for a new life, and instead she had found 7 children who needed her, and a chance to become the mother they had always wished for. The months that followed transformed the old McGraw ranch in ways Sarah had never imagined. Every morning began before sunrise, the wind still cool across the open plains, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and the earthy aroma of tilled soil. Sarah rose quietly while the children slept, lighting the stove and preparing breakfast. There were 7 mouths to feed, and each meal required careful planning and ingenuity. Some mornings, she would scrape together flour, cornmeal, and whatever vegetables they had managed to grow or trade at the market in the nearest town. The children, once suspicious and guarded, began to rely on her presence, drawn by the quiet consistency of her care. The days were long, full of chores that would have overwhelmed anyone unaccustomed to ranch life. She taught the boys how to mend fences properly, hammering posts and weaving wire until the enclosures held firm. The girls learned to knead dough, to bake bread so fragrant it filled the entire house, and to patch worn clothing with careful stitches. Sarah worked alongside them, never demanding more than they could give, but insisting always on diligence and pride in their labor. Slowly, the rhythm of the house became a kind of music, each child finding their place within it, each task performed not out of fear but out of trust and respect. There were days when it seemed hopeless. Luke, the eldest, often retreated to the barn or the farthest corners of the yard, arms crossed and jaw tight. He carried the weight of responsibility like a yoke, trying to protect his siblings while holding his own grief tightly locked inside. Emma, the second eldest, was quieter but no less wary, her small body tense, her eyes always alert. The younger ones tested limits constantly, running into the kitchen when Sarah was cooking, hiding spoons, spilling milk, but she met each act with patience, never anger, only steady guidance. Gradually, the walls the children had built around themselves began to crumble. One afternoon, as the sun poured gold across the fields, Luke approached her while she was hanging laundry on the line. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust as he stopped beside her, hands shoved deep into his pockets. "We fixed the roof on the barn," he said, voice stiff but proud. Sweat gleamed on his brow, and the effort of the labor showed in the set of his shoulders. Sarah turned, smiling gently. "You did? That's very fine work, Luke." I'm proud of you. He hesitated, glancing at her out of the corner of his eye. You didn't have to stay, you know, he said quietly, almost to himself. Most folks wouldn't. Her gaze softened. Maybe not, she replied. But you needed someone. And maybe I did too. You see, sometimes we find a home not where we expect, but where it is needed most. That evening, the children gathered around the fire as Sarah sewed patches onto one of the boys' shirts. The youngest, a freckle-faced boy with untamed hair, curled up at her side, resting his head against her lap. The little girls leaned in, fascinated by her nimble fingers and the rhythmic clack of her needle. Luke, pretending to read a tattered book, kept stealing glances at her, a faint smile threatening the stern mask he wore during the day. Then, softly, Sarah began to hum a lullaby, one her mother had sung to her when she was a child. It was a simple tune, filled with warmth and the memory of home. The room went still, the children drawn to the melody as if to something they had forgotten existed. Can you sing it again? Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. Sarah smiled, nodding, and began again. One by one, the children relaxed, their bodies uncurling, their faces softening. The firelight flickered across their features, and for the first time in months, the ranch felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with the wind or the creaking doors. The word "ma" began to slip into their speech naturally. It started softly, tentative and uncertain, but over time it became the name they used for her every day. It was a word of trust, of affection, of recognition. Sarah felt it like sunlight warming her heart, melting away the remnants of the grief and fear that had accompanied her across the plains. One afternoon, a stranger rode up on a sturdy horse. A man from the county office, his coat dusted with the trail behind him, dismounted and removed his hat. His gaze swept over the tidy yard, the freshly mended fences, and the children playing together in a rare moment of laughter. You Mrs. McGraw? He asked, his tone formal but friendly. Sarah paused, taking in the sight of the children chasing one another with joy, the smoke curling from the chimney, the small patches of garden flourishing under her care. She nodded. I am. The man's face broke into a small smile. Heard the county might have to take these children if no one stepped in. Seems that won't be necessary anymore. You've made this place a home again. When he rode away, Luke stood beside her on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills that rolled endlessly across the horizon. He thought you were Pa's wife, he said quietly, his voice tinged with awe. Sarah laid a hand on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of his body beneath her palm. In a way, I suppose I am, she said gently. I'm keeping his promise. I'm the one who stays when he cannot. And I will do my best for all of you. The seasons turned, painting the ranch in colors that shifted from the bright greens of spring to the golden waves of summer wheat, to the deep browns and fiery reds of autumn. The children grew in strength and confidence, their laughter a constant melody that filled every corner of the house. Sarah found her own life expanding with theirs, each small victory and daily task reinforcing the bond that had formed between them. Neighbors began to speak of the McGraw ranch with admiration. The mail-order bride who had arrived to find no husband had created a family from the fragments of loss and loneliness. She taught the children not only the practical skills needed to survive on a ranch but also the softer, enduring lessons of kindness, resilience, and love. Years later, when the youngest prepared to leave the ranch for a new life, he hugged her tightly, whispering the words she would carry in her heart forever. You weren't the bride Pa sent for, Ma. You were the one God did. Sarah held back tears, her heart swelling with a quiet joy. She had come seeking one life, but in its place, she had found another, 7 children who were no longer just orphans, but a family. The ranch had become a home, the children her own, and the love she had nurtured had grown deeper than she could have imagined. In the stillness of the prairie evenings, as the sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, Sarah Whitfield would sit on the porch and watch the children at play, feeling a peace she had never known. She had entered their lives with uncertainty, grief, and longing, and yet she had given them what they most desired, a mother's love, unwavering and steadfast. The house, once empty and quiet, now breathed with warmth, laughter, and belonging. And in the heart of it all, Sarah knew she had found the home she had been searching for all along, not in a husband, but in the 7 small lives she had helped shape and nurture.